You know, so people say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean. And so for me, belief, for example, is often reflected not so much in proposition as it is in action. If I want to know what you believe, I could ask you, and hopefully you have some idea about what you believe, but I'd rather see what you do.
Well, can I push back a little bit with this? Because, like, for example, when I was reading your book, your newest book, actually this time, 12 More Rules. They're very good books, by the way. I mean, I recommend them.
Thank you, sir.
Honestly. So one thing you mentioned in the book, you were talking about some psychological theory, which I don't forget. I forget what it is right now. But you mentioned something. You said there's, the problem with this such and such theory is that it doesn't have any evidence. Full stop. Categorical. All this, what you're doing now, you didn't mention that. You didn't say, well, it depends on what you mean by this. It depends on what you... Sorry to say, but it depends on what you mean by this. It depends on what you mean. You become postmodern all of a sudden. It's like you become now...
that's a definite... That's a definite... Yeah. Look, I think that's partly why the postmodern critique, in some sense, was inevitable, is because we started to dig down into something like, say, the meaning of stories, because that's really where the postmodernists got their impetus, because the postmodern literary theorists, sorry to drag this up, but it's relevant, they hit a mystery, which was, well, if you read a given text, story, or even a paragraph, and you get 100 people to offer their opinion on it, in some way you get 100 different opinions. And you can tell that if you assign students to write an essay, let's say. And so then a problem emerges is if there's 100 different opinions, and some of them even appear to oppose one another, how do you know what the true significance is of the text? And then worse, how do you even know that there is a true significance? And then you think, okay, well, that's a major problem. And then here's a worse problem. Imagine you have an assemblage of texts, like the biblical corpus, let's say, which is really a library, and it's in some sense canonical, right? Well, if you can't decide on the fixed meaning of even a given paragraph, how in the world can you make the statement that this selection of texts, which are much more complicated than just paragraphs, is somehow canonical? Now, the answer to that is, this is the answer. We don't know. Now, the problem with the postmodernists wasn't that they figured out that this was a mystery, because not only is this the mystery of textual interpretation, which is a major mystery, how do we understand a text, but it's also the mystery of perception, because at the same time, people who are investigating perception, Jonathan has been talking about this with John Vervaeke, a cognitive scientist, at the same time, scientists on the perceptual front in AI labs and neuroscientists were discovering that it's so complicated to look at the world, which is to interpret the world, let's say, that it isn't obvious that it's even possible, which is partly why we don't have autonomous robots. They can't see the world. Now, it's easy for us because we just look at it, but that's not so easy. And so, so what's the point of all this? Well, the point of all this is that if you delve into questions deeply enough, you do run into the problem of perception and the multitude and multiplicity of perception. And that's a real problem. And so when I do something like I interrogate a question, well, the postmodern problem does emerge. Now, I've been trying to work out solutions to that, and Jonathan and I and John Vervaeke have been discussing this a lot. The postmodernists were correct, I think, in their diagnosis of the problem. They leapt right to the idea that the way we solve the problem of perception is by exercising power. They just took a Marxist story and said, well, there's the solution.
When you say they here, who are you talking about in particular?
Mostly the French intellectual types like Derrida and Foucault.
I would disagree with this, by the way. I don't think Derrida or Foucault took a Marxist position at all.
Well, Jonathan, you want to have at that for a bit?
But that's not my fight. It's a worthless victory for me.
Are you sure you want to talk about that?
No. I don't think, I don't care.
Okay, well, we can either delve into that or not.
Let me just say something, Jordan, about what you were saying. That is, I think that when there's this question of do you believe in God, I think one of the problems that the difficulty that Jordan faced with a modern Protestantism, which was very propositional. And it was like, I believe, and it's just a bunch of things that you believe in terms of thinking. And I do think that what Jordan is trying to grasp at and trying to understand is actually probably closer to something that most traditional Muslims would believe, which is that if you say that you submit to God, but you don't submit to God, then that word is empty.
That I agree with.
Yes.
And the question is, why is it empty, right? Yeah. If you said the words, why is it still empty?
And so I think that what he's grasping at is to find a more encompassing, it's like, stop asking me if I believe in God, watch me.
Yeah, okay.